There is a country house in Nottinghamshire that is, in plain visible measurement, about half the size of Wentworth Woodhouse and twice as strange. Above ground, it is a Jacobean stone mansion of moderate ambition, set in 15,000 acres of beech and oak woodland on the western edge of Sherwood Forest. Beneath the ground, it is something else. Beneath the lawn, beneath the formal gardens, beneath the home farm, beneath the public road that crosses the estate, there are 15 miles of tunnels. The tunnels include an underground ballroom 174 feet long and 64 feet wide, capable of holding 2,000 dancers. The man who built it never used it. He never invited anyone to dance in it. He died alone in 1879 in a small pink-painted room 3 stories above it, having spent 25 years and the modern equivalent of £100 million building rooms he never used. His name was William John Cavendish-Scott-Bentinck. He was the 5th Duke of Portland, and in 1898, 19 years after his death, a London widow filed the most extraordinary inheritance claim in modern English legal history. She claimed the Duke had been leading a secret double life since the 1830s as a London upholsterer called T.C. Druce. She claimed his Highgate Cemetery coffin contained nothing but lead. She demanded the exhumation. The case ran for 9 years. The exhumation finally took place on the 30th of December 1907, exactly 43 years to the day after T.C. Druce's recorded burial. The coffin was opened in the cemetery chapel. Inside, in a state of well-preserved decomposition, was the body of T.C. Druce. The Duke had not been Druce. The case was dismissed. The widow's son, who had pursued the claim for 9 years, was sentenced to 4 years penal servitude for perjury. But the tunnels were still there. Welbeck Abbey covers 240 rooms above ground. The original Jacobean house, with its 19th century wings, is impressive in the way that any large country house is impressive, and unremarkable in the way that any large country house is unremarkable. Its presence is the part you can see. Its absence, the part you cannot, is what makes it unique. The 15 miles of tunnels include a glass-roofed underground riding school 396 feet long, larger than the riding school at the Spanish Royal Stables in Madrid. They include a billiard room of 70 feet, an underground library of more than 25,000 volumes, an observatory with a retractable roof, and a private 250-yard horse-drawn rail tunnel that allowed the Duke to travel from the Abbey to the local railway station at Worksop without ever stepping outside. They walk the Abbey gardens. They photograph the clock tower. They pause at the ruined Abbey gateway. They are not permitted, except on rare open days, to descend into the tunnels at all. And almost none of them, in the whole of an October afternoon's walk through the park, have any awareness of the second mansion that runs beneath their feet. The Welbeck of the surface is a Jacobean country house. The Welbeck of beneath the surface is something almost without parallel in any English aristocratic estate. This is the strangest English aristocrat of the 19th century. It is the most ambitious private subterranean construction project ever attempted in England. It is the story of the Druce-Portland Case of 1898 to 1907, which was the most followed civil court drama of the late Victorian press. And it is the story of a country house where, even today, the family who own it have to walk above tunnels they have never personally inspected because some of them are sealed and some of them are flooded and some of them have not been entered by any living person for more than 100 years. On this channel, we tell the story of every great English house through the names the official guidebook forgot. Welbeck is the strangest of the great Whig estates. It is also the story of the master mason who laid 2.5 million bricks of underground vaulting in 22 years and retired on a private pension, the navigator who died of silicosis in March 1864, and whose initials are still carved in the painted plaster of the underground ballroom, and the horse handler who was the only person the recluse Duke is reported ever to have spoken to in person. If you find these strange and dark and epic investigations into Britain's hidden architectural history worth your time, please subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me which estate, eccentric, or hidden history we should investigate next, and help these stories reach the audience they deserve. It begins with a duke who was almost a king. The Cavendish-Bentinck family acquired Welbeck Abbey in 1607. The 12th century Premonstratensian abbey on the site had been dissolved in 1538 under Henry VIII and granted to a courtier called Sir Charles Cavendish, fourth son of Bess of Hardwicke. The family rebuilt the central abbey range as a Jacobean country house. The family rose through the 17th and 18th centuries to a series of marquessate, and finally, in 1716, to the Dukedom of Portland, granted to William Bentinck of Welbeck, who had been the personal favourite of King William III, and who had governed England with the king throughout the Glorious Revolution. By the early 19th century, the Bentinck Cavendishes were one of the half-dozen wealthiest aristocratic families in England, with London houses on Cavendish Square, Yorkshire estates, the Welbeck home farm, and an income from coal mines, rents, and political offices that ran to several £100,000 a year. The fourth Duke of Portland was a notable Tory politician who served twice as Prime Minister. His son, the fifth Duke, was born in 1800 and would, in due course, become one of the most reclusive and architecturally peculiar men in English aristocratic history. Before he did, he was almost married. In the late 1830s, the fifth Duke, then Lord John Bentinck, and heir to his father, is reported to have proposed marriage to the singer Adelaide Kemble, sister of the actor Charles Kemble, and aunt of the future actress Fanny Kemble. Adelaide refused him. Family tradition, recorded in 1898 in a deposition by his nephew the sixth Duke, holds that this rejection was the central wound of the fifth Duke's life and the catalyst for the next 40 years of withdrawal. We do not have to accept the family tradition. The deposition was made in defense of the sixth Duke's inheritance during the Druce trial, and the romantic disappointment story is the kind of explanation Victorian families gave for behaviour they could not otherwise account for. But what is documented is that the fifth Duke never married. What is also documented is that from approximately 1854, when he succeeded his father at the age of 54, he progressively cut himself off from all personal contact with the world. By 1860, John Bentinck was, by every reasonable measure, a recluse. He lived in a small set of private rooms in the west wing of Welbeck Abbey. The rooms had no decoration. The walls were painted pink. The doors had double letterboxes, one for incoming messages and one for outgoing, with a system of bells and counterweights that allowed the Duke to receive and send paper without ever opening a door. His meals were left on a small table outside his door. His laundry was collected from a hatch. His personal physician, a Dr. Robertson of Worksop, was permitted to attend him only by writing prescriptions through the letterbox. Dr. Robertson, in a memoir published in 1898, said he never once, in 19 years of attendance, saw the fifth Duke's face. The fifth Duke required all his approximately 200 estate staff to behave as though he did not exist. They were instructed in a written household memorandum issued in 1862 that if they encountered the Duke on the estate, they were to pass him as if you have not seen a tree. Failure to do so was grounds for dismissal. The Duke was reported occasionally in the village of Worksop or in the Abbey woods, walking alone before dawn or after dusk, dressed in a long brown coat with a tall stovepipe hat and an umbrella. He paid his staff well. He treated them, in his correspondence, with formal kindness. He simply did not wish to see them or to see anyone. In 1854, the year of his accession, he began to dig. The first tunnel project at Welbeck was a small connecting corridor between the Duke's private apartments and the home farm. It was completed in 1856. It was 800 yards long. It was built in cut-and-cover construction. The diggers cut a deep trench, lined it with brick, vaulted the roof, and replaced the topsoil. The corridor allowed the Duke to move from his private rooms to the farm without crossing the lawn. It was the first of more than 100 tunnels he would build. Between 1854 and 1879, John Bentinck commissioned, designed in conjunction with his estate engineer Albert Roll and the architect Thomas Lawrence, and personally directed the construction of a network of tunnels and underground rooms that, by the year of his death, exceeded 15 miles in total length. The principal underground rooms included the Great Ballroom, which was the largest single pillarless room in any English private dwelling at the time, and which the Duke never used because he never invited anyone to it. There was a glass-roofed underground riding school, vast enough that the Duke's horse Friday could be exercised by a single groom while the Duke watched from the gallery. There was an underground library of 25,000 volumes. There was a billiard room. There was an observatory. There was an underground bathing pool. There was a covered horse railway with iron rails set into a tunnel 6 feet wide that ran from the Abbey to a private platform at Worksop railway station. The Duke could travel to London by horse-drawn carriage from his private rooms to the railway and never step into the open air. He employed, at peak, 1,500 men on the construction. They worked in shifts, day and night, for 25 years. The Duke paid them well. He also paid each man, on first hire, a small additional weekly bonus of 1 shilling, conditional on never speaking publicly about the works. The total expenditure on the tunnels has been estimated in recent reconstructions of the Duke's private accounts at between £600,000 and £750,000 over 25 years. In modern equivalent, this is between £80 and £100 million. He paid for it from estate income. He never sold a single field of the Welbeck estate during his lifetime to fund the works. He maintained, throughout the 25 years, a normal level of estate revenue and a normal level of personal political subscription. He gave generously to local charities. He died on the 6th of December 1879, alone, in a chair in his small pink-walled rooms, of pneumonia. He was 79. The world's interest in the 5th Duke and his tunnels was not, in the end, the principal Welbeck story of the late 19th century. In 1898, 19 years after the 5th Duke's death, a London widow named Anna Maria Druce filed the most extraordinary inheritance claim in modern English legal history. Anna Maria Druce was the widow of Walter Druce, who was the son of a Baker Street upholsterer called Thomas Charles Druce, who had run a successful London furniture business called the Baker Street Bazaar from 1837 until his death in 1864. Anna Maria Druce, 6 years a widow herself by 1898, claimed in her petition to the High Court that her father-in-law, T.C. Druce, had not actually died in 1864. She claimed that the funeral and burial of T.C. Druce in Highgate Cemetery on the 30th of December 1864 had been a staged event with a coffin filled with lead. She claimed that the man known as T.C. Druce had been, in fact, the 5th Duke of Portland, John Bentinck, leading a secret double identity as a London tradesman from approximately 1837 to 1864. She claimed that on the 28th of December 1864, the Duke, tired of his double life, had simply staged his Druce death and resumed his full-time existence as the 5th Duke of Portland at Welbeck. She claimed, therefore, that her late husband, Walter Druce, was the elder son of the 5th Duke of Portland, and that her own son, George Hollamby Druce, was the rightful 6th Duke of Portland and the rightful owner of Welbeck Abbey. She demanded the immediate exhumation of the Highgate coffin to settle the question. The case ran from December 1898 until December 1907. It became, in the late Victorian and Edwardian press, the most followed civil case in England. The Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail covered it. Anna Druce was photographed on the steps of the High Court. Witnesses were called who claimed to have known the 5th Duke and T.C. Druce simultaneously. Witnesses were called who claimed to have seen the 5th Duke entering the Baker Street Bazaar through a private back door. A retired Worksop railway porter testified that the 5th Duke had been observed boarding the London train in disguise. A Portland family servant who had served at Welbeck for 31 years testified that the 5th Duke had repeatedly travelled to London under what the servant described as a different name. Anna Druce was committed to a mental asylum in 1903 with depressive psychosis. The case was continued by her son, George Hollamby Druce, who in 1907 finally obtained a court order for the exhumation of the Highgate grave. The exhumation took place on the 30th of December 1907, exactly 43 years to the day after T.C. Druce's recorded burial, in the presence of the High Court coroner, 2 Portland family solicitors, 3 press photographers, and George Hollamby Druce himself. The grave was opened. The coffin was raised. It was opened in the cemetery chapel. Inside, in a state of well-preserved decomposition, was the body of an elderly bearded man. It was T.C. Druce. The body was identified by surviving members of his family, dental records, hair color, surviving fragments of clothing, and the remaining facial features were consistent with the 1864 photographs of T.C. Druce in the Highgate sexton's records. There was no evidence of an empty coffin or of an alternative body. The case was dismissed. George Hollamby Druce was tried for perjury in 1908 and sentenced to 4 years penal servitude, having admitted that he had bribed several of his witnesses to fabricate testimony. The Portland inheritance, including Welbeck Abbey, and the family fortune, was confirmed in the line of the 6th Duke and his descendants. The 5th Duke had been the 5th Duke. T.C. Druce had been T.C. Druce. They had never been the same person. The story had been, in the formal verdict of the High Court of 1907, an outrageous, baseless, and malicious fabrication. But it was, also, the story everyone in late Victorian England wanted to be true, because the 5th Duke had been so very strange, and the tunnels under Welbeck were so very real, and the fact that one of the wealthiest men in England had spent 25 years not allowing anyone to see his face was, in 1898, considered evidence that he must have been hiding something. The English public, in the late Victorian and Edwardian period, would have very much liked the 5th Duke to have been a London tradesman. He had not been. He had been a duke. The tunnels had been a duke's project. The tunnels were not, in the end, dug by the duke, whose name is on every stone. Their presence at Welbeck is documented, recorded in ink on paper in the Duke's own building accounts, in the diaries of Albert Roll, the estate engineer, and in the wage books held at the Welbeck Estate Archive at Nottingham University Library. But their stories are not. There was a master mason called William Bartlett, who was the foreman of the underground masonry crew from 1857 to 1879, and who is named in the 5th Duke's accounts 1,144 times. He was 31 when he started. He was 53 when he finished. On the death of the Duke, he had personally laid an estimated 2.4 million bricks of underground vaulting. He retired with a personal pension from the Duke of £200 a year. In modern money, approximately £25,000, which he received without interruption until his own death in 1894. But the man whose name should be remembered above every other Welbeck servant was a navigator called James Foster. James Foster is named in the 1862 wage book as receiving 32 shillings a week, and he was one of the principal tunnel diggers under the great ballroom excavation. He died on the 11th of March 1864 of tunnel sickness, which the modern medical reading of his symptoms suggests was almost certainly silicosis, the chronic lung disease produced by inhaling fine sandstone dust, which the deep cuts at Welbeck produced in vast quantities. He was 28. He left a widow and 3 children. The Duke paid for his funeral and continued his widow's wages for the rest of her life. But what makes James Foster's name worth remembering is not his death. It is the inscription his colleagues left for him on the wall of the underground state ballroom, halfway up the eastern arched recess. The 6th Duke's 1880 inspection report describes it as a name and a date in a workman's hand, which I have ordered preserved. The name is J. Foster. The date is 11/3/64. The hand is, by every modern epigrapher's judgment, the writing of a man who had walked into the ballroom on the morning of the 12th of March, 1864, to discover that his colleague had died in the works the night before. There was a horse handler called Reuben Sneath who managed the Duke's stables for 22 years between 1857 and 1879. He was the only member of the household whom the 5th Duke is reported to have spoken to in person. He is named in Roller's diary 41 times, always with affection. He retired in 1879, the day the Duke died. He took up a public house tenancy at Worksop. He died in 1898, the year the Druce case began. They appear in the records as footnotes. a name beside a sum, a diary mention, a wage book entry, a graffito in plaster. They vanish into the silence that swallows everyone in a great house who is not a member of the family that owns it. We do not know their faces. We do not know how they viewed the duke they served. We know only that they were there, that the tunnels they built are still there, and that their names survived because the fifth duke kept his accounts in unbroken series for 25 years, and nobody threw them away. The fifth duke commissioned an underground mansion. Other men dug it, brick by brick, in shifts day and night, breathing sandstone dust until their lungs failed. The estate absorbed both. Stand in the ruined Abbey gateway at Welbeck on a November afternoon. Stand in the ruined Welbeck Abbey gateway, with the medieval stones rising on either side, and the present mansion behind you, and the lawn rolling green to the horizon, and you see what every visitor sees: a Jacobean English country house in 15,000 acres of woodland, owned by a single family for 4 centuries. But look closer, and the picture complicates. Beneath your feet, beneath the ruined gateway, beneath the lawn, beneath the formal gardens, beneath the visitor car park, there are 15 miles of tunnels. Some of them are reinforced concrete from a 1958 structural intervention. Some of them are collapsed. Some of them are flooded. Some of them are sealed. The State Ballroom is still there. The 25,000 volume library is partially still there. The horse rail tunnel to Worksop is collapsed but still partially mappable. The whole estate is 2 estates, one above the surface and one below it, and the surface visitors have, almost without exception, no awareness of the second. Welbeck is not one estate. It is the record, in surface stone and underground brick, of the strangest aristocratic ambition of the 19th century. The fifth duke wanted to live in a parallel mansion that no one could see, with a parallel ballroom that he would never use, served by a parallel rail line he could enter without being observed, in a country where he had been raised to public visibility from birth. He built that. He never used most of it. He died in a small pink room with the curtains drawn, after 25 years of building rooms beneath rooms. The estate gave him what he asked of it, in the careful, expensive, neutral manner of a great country house accustomed to absorbing the strangest projects of its owners. The estate always gives. That is its genius, and that is its cost, because what Welbeck has also always preserved, in its building accounts, and its engineers' diaries, and its wage books, is the names of the William Bartletts, and the James Fosters, and the Reuben Sneaths, without whom no tunnel could have been dug, no ballroom built, no rail line laid. The Duke is buried at Holbeck under a stone with no inscription. The men who dug his tunnels are in unmarked graves in the village burial grounds of Worksop, Holbeck, Ollerton, and Edwinstowe. Welbeck Abbey asked the same question that all great houses ask, but with a particularly subterranean sharpness that no other English country house quite matches. Who does an estate belong to? The Cavendish-Bentinck family, who acquired the manor in 1607. The fifth Duke, who built 15 miles of tunnels under it for reasons no one has ever convincingly explained. The London widow, who in 1898 launched the most followed civil case of late Victorian England on the theory that the Duke had been a Baker Street tradesman. The 1,500 men who dug the tunnels, of whom an unknown but significant number died of silicosis. The 200,000 visitors a year who walk the surface gardens without knowing what is underneath. Or the limestone bedrock itself, the underlying Permian dolomite of the Sherwood Basin that was here long before any abbey was built and will be there long after the last tunnel has collapsed. Welbeck does not answer. The estate never answers. It simply stands, surface and underground, and lets you decide. And on the wall of the underground state ballroom, halfway up the eastern arched recess, there is a single small graffito carved into the painted plaster in 1864 by an unknown labourer. The 6th Duke's 1880 inspection report described it as a name and a date in a workman's hand, which I have ordered preserved. The name is J. Foster. The date is 11/3/64. The hand is, by every modern epigrapher's judgment, the writing of a man who had walked into the ballroom that morning to discover that his colleague had died in the works the night before. He is still down there. He always will be. If this strange story moved you, surprised you, or made you see a building differently, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me which estate, eccentric, or hidden history we should investigate next. There are hundreds of these stories waiting to be told, and every one of them is hiding something beneath the surface.